Hi, I'm Dr. Taryn P. Lupo, and back in the day, I used to see a lot of patients who were involved in car wrecks. So now that I'm not doing it so much anymore, I don't really have to worry about what I have to say, and I can be a straight shooter with you. So stay tuned, and I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about how to find a good personal injury attorney and how to pick the right doctor. Most likely, if you're watching this video, you or somebody you know has been involved in some sort of trauma or car accident where you guys are thinking about if you need an attorney. So let me go over a few things and we'll discuss, do you even need an attorney? First, let me start off by saying I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving you legal advice. This is just for educational purposes and all the information I've learned over the years dealing with this whole system. Now, the first thing people always ask me when they come in is, hey, do I even need an attorney? You know, this injury is not that big of a deal. It's just a little fender bender. Should I bother with getting an attorney? And what I found out over the years was people with an attorney usually got paid 2 to 3 times more in their settlement. Understand that insurance companies have to deal with a lot of people who try to cheat the system. Insurance companies have people that fake all the time or try to figure out a way to scam the system. So they're usually very defensive about paying money. On the flip side, I've also seen insurance companies do some pretty slimy things where they will sweet talk someone into signing papers right away and settling a case when this person has a lot more damage and is going to have a whole lifetime of bills. And they just really wanted money quick and they signed off and took the money right away. Sometimes patients don't understand that the little injuries, something like a 5-mile-per-hour whiplash injury, ends up being a big deal down the road, especially a year later when all the money's gone and you've already settled. What ends up happening is a person's injured and they're desperate for money and they just want to get it over with. An insurance company will come along and dangle a check in front of them for a ridiculously low amount. And they'll tell them over the phone, that's as high as we'll ever go. And then what happens is if you get an attorney, all of a sudden they find magical money and they can go higher. So I've seen people try to deal with the insurance companies on their own and they just do not get very far. You might think a little fender bender is no big deal. And, you know, a little whiplash injury, really, it's going to hurt for a few weeks and be over. But you're wrong. Whiplash can be very, very serious. I want to explain a little more about whiplash injuries and how they work. And this model spine will help me a little bit. What you're looking at is this is like the base of the skull that's been cut off, the occiput, and the cervical spine. So I'd be like sitting this direction. What happens when you get in a car wreck is your torso, your thoracic spine moves forward before your neck does. And what will happen is your neck has to snap to catch back up. And it snaps by going backwards towards the headrest and then really hard forward. What this does is injure this area of the neck, the very top. It rips these ligaments up. And the lower area around C5 and C6 gets damaged in this motion. It's very, very devastating because during the wreck, your head accelerates to almost 15 Gs. That's equivalent to having your head shot out of a cannon for a few milliseconds. That's an enormous amount of stress on the spinal connective tissue, and it does serious damage, even at 5 miles per hour. Let's first discuss the physics of the car wreck. A lot of it's going to depend on what kind of car you were in when you were involved in your accident. A lot of older cars or ones made of heavy metal, they don't really get that damaged in the wreck. In fact, it's usually just a couple dents on the bumper. Those are actually much, much worse because all that force goes through that steel frame and right into your body. The cars that look like they really got busted up, crumpled, and mangled are actually much safer. Cars today are designed to crumple up and crush, so they absorb the impact instead of your body. So some of the most horrible looking accidents where the cars are just crumpled wrecks, you'll see the people actually get out of. If you compare that with an accident that happens in an older model car, where the car doesn't take much damage, you'll see people who get their neck broken at 10 miles per hour. Conventional care after your accident will usually involve going to get some diagnostic studies at the hospital or another facility where they x-ray you and make sure nothing's broken. And then what they usually recommend, once nothing is broken, is to immobilize the joint, do bed rest, and some painkillers. This is fine in the very beginning of the accident, but after a few days, you really want to take the brace off and start mobilizing the area. If you continue to wear the neck brace, it can cause a lot of problems with scar tissue down the road. It'll help and accelerate the formation of adhesions. The upper neck area and the base of the head are very complicated, and a lot of blood vessels and nerves in soft tissues run through the same area. Unfortunately, this area is very susceptible to whiplash injuries, and it can cause a whole host of problems. Also, the base of the neck has its own problems. The nerves that come out of the base of the neck control everything that goes on in your arms and upper trunk. This causes a lot of disruption when there's twisting or the seatbelt smashes into your shoulder, and it creates this traction during injuries which stretches these nerves and damages them. Over time, these damaged nerves can heal, but if they're completely torn, you're in big trouble. During a whiplash injury, it's very easy to tear the muscles and nerves. A muscle tear is actually called a strain. A strain can be very serious, but most will heal in time. One of the worst parts of the injury is the sprain, and that's a tearing of the ligaments themselves. Now, ligaments hold the bones together. They no longer hold the bones together well, and it creates kind of a sloppy joint where bones move too much. If the bones get knocked out of place and the ligaments are torn, you can start to have real problems with adhesions and pinched nerves. The big problem with ligaments is once they get too stretched, there's no way to unstretch them. It's kind of like a rubber band. Once a rubber band's all stretched out, you can't bring it back. Once that happens, you will have joint instability the rest of your life. After about 2 weeks after the accident, you enter what's called the remodeling phase. And at that point, what your doctor is trying to do is keep tissue from sticking to each other. The ligaments and muscles need to slide while they heal. If you do not put a lot of motion into them, they will fuse together and scar down. Think of it like a piece of gristle. You can get a good idea of what scar tissue looks like by checking out a piece of meat. That white, fibrous connective tissue that's really hard to cut, that gristly stuff, that's scar tissue. One of the main reasons you want to go to therapy during your remodeling phase is so this doesn't happen to your muscles. Muscles and the connective tissue they touch need to be able to slide back and forth freely. After an injury, the swelling in the scar tissue will cause adhesions and stop that healthy motion from happening. Here's a video to describe it a little better and show you. So what you have on top is the connective tissue, and this is muscle moving nice and healthy. It's sliding back and forth along the tissue. Now I'm going to compare this to an unhealthy situation. After an injury, or whenever there's pain and swelling, they don't slide anymore. There's the connective tissue on top, but the muscles aren't sliding nearly as much. If that happens long enough, calcification will actually form on the ligaments, and you can see that here on this scan. And if you're really unlucky, those calcification knobs will actually start to press on the spinal cord itself, and that's really bad news. Let me show you what a healthy curve looks like. This neck's relatively healthy. but there's a nice curve, and that curve is there to absorb shock, because your head's like a bowling ball bouncing around on your neck all day. So that curve is really important. What happens during an accident is that you can damage this curve. You can get what's known as a straight neck or a military neck. Now, the joints no longer absorb shock and they drive into each other at full force. A lack of healthy motion will actually cause the joints to start fusing and forming arthritis. The disc will get damaged because the spine no longer pumps nutrients to it, and it starts to collapse. And over a few years, you'll start seeing something like this, where you see osteophytes and the bones fusing into one big bone. And that is also not good news and can be slowed down and even prevented sometimes if you continue to get care after your accident. If this process is ignored and motion isn't restored to the joints, eventually they just kind of fuse into one big bone and you end up having posture like this guy. A sign you have a good doctor is if they at least take a flexion and extension X-ray series, including the Atlas movements. I'm going to show you what that is. So here's a flexion when you put your chin to your chest, and extension when you put your head back. What this shows is a lot more than a static X-ray. It actually shows what's moving on the spine correctly and what's not. The problem with just taking a static X-ray of a spine and not moving the spine around and X-raying from different angles is that you can't see how well the joint is actually moving. You really can't see ligaments well on X-rays, so you kind of have to put the body in different positions to see if the ligaments are doing their jobs or not. This is especially important with the atlas bone, which is the very top bone in your neck. The problem is this bone gets really easily injured, and it's an extremely important bone because so much of the spinal cord and blood vessels run through it. To really get a good atlas study, it's kind of hard with just regular X-rays. I always recommend video fluoroscopy or motion X-rays. These are superior to regular X-rays, and they really let you see the motion of the joint, what's stuck and what's not, and what's moving correctly. Here you can see a head moving backwards and forward, and you're checking to see how well the joints are opening and closing. Here you can tell the atlas bone is not really moving as well as it should. It should be almost touching the back of the skull. Now this next one here is important because you need to test the rotation, moving the head back and forth. Right now you're seeing the lower neck and the shoulder area, which gets injured a lot. But what's more important and usually really causes problems, again, is that atlas bone, and you have to open the mouth to see it. So you can see lateral flexion of the atlas joint. You have to open the mouth to see it and how well it's moving. This motion X-ray is kind of a little blurry, but it does show the atlas movement. And here you can see a transverse ligament rupture. That bone's moving way too far away from the one below it. The atlas bone is coming all the way off. Serious injuries like a transverse ligament rupture or a rupture to the odontoid check ligament are often missed by hospitals and doctors because they don't take motion X-rays. I can't overstate the importance of using motion X-ray when you can. Besides ligament damage, the other thing that routinely gets injured is your brain. You have to remember your brain is sitting in a big liquid vat, and when you get a whiplash injury, the brain will actually slam against the front of the skull and the back of the skull. And this is known as a coup contra coup injury. If you're unlucky enough to also have then hit the windshield, then you can do double brain damage to the frontal lobe. And this is pretty common. Conventional care will usually be an MRI or maybe CT scanning, where they'll look for contusions like this one, that big white spot. And if necessary, they'll actually drill into the head and release the pressure. But the injury that's really hard to see is damage to the axons. And that's what you're looking at here is a nerve cell, a little dendrite growing there. And those can get damaged by something called axonal shearing. The gray and the white matter in your brain have different masses. And so what happens during the accident is they go different speeds and they stretch these axons that are between them, these nerve cells. Again, that's called axonal shearing. Sometimes this kind of brain damage takes a while to present. Usually your loved ones start noticing your personality changing and some psychological differences. Signs of axonal shearing don't really show up on regular MRIs. You need some special ones like a DTI MRI or a SWI MRI. There's also some other tests that are quite useful to have. There's something called a SPECT CT, and an MEG can also be quite helpful. Again, if you feel like you're having some sort of brain disturbances, you might want to talk to your doctor about ordering these tests. Now that you better understand the science behind whiplash cases, let's talk about how to pick a good attorney. Now, finding a good personal injury attorney can be tough. What I suggest is you ask around your friends and go on social media and ask if someone's had a good experience with an attorney. Also, actually pick up the phone and call the attorney. This will give you a good idea of their level of service. If all you ever get is an assistant and you can't get past his gatekeeper, move on. Those attorneys are really difficult to work with. You want an attorney that'll actually sit down and talk to you and not pass the buck to someone else in their office. Also, these days, there are reviews of attorneys online. You can go to Yelp and look somebody up. And those can be very helpful as well. Once you actually find an attorney you like, you can expect to pay anywhere from a third to sometimes even a half of your settlement, depending on how good the attorney is. The one thing patients don't realize is you can negotiate this fee. So if you feel like you have a pretty slam dunk case that, somebody hit you and it's clearly their fault and you're going to have a large case, you should negotiate their fee before you ever sign anything. Also, you want to find a personal injury attorney that's pretty much all they do. If you go to an attorney that does, a million other things, they're usually not as adept at building a really good case. You're kind of taking your chances if you're going with, your girlfriend's uncle who also does copyright and title searches. It's probably not the best choice. Now that we discussed your lawyer, we need to discuss your doctors. And really you want to go to a team of doctors. The captain of the ship should be your chiropractor. You're going to see them the most, and you're probably going to see them for about a year during that remodeling phase we talked about. It's also very smart to do your physical therapy at your chiropractor so the care is coordinated. Most of the other doctors will mainly be used for diagnostics and testing. I would refer to other doctors for orthopedic evaluations, MRIs, nerve conduction studies, and I always sent my motion x-rays out to a radiologist. When brain trauma is suspected, it's also smart to have a psychologist and also a neurologist check them out. It's just good doctrine to try to collaborate with as many specialists as you can. But one doctor needs to run the show, or all that information will just kind of get blurred and lost. And let your chiropractor do that because they see you the most. Chiropractors are really excellent at restoring nerve flow and keeping those adhesions from forming that I showed you before. They'll also help straighten out the joints, which is nice. No other doctors are trained to reduce subluxations. You just can't substitute this kind of corrective care by going to just a physical therapist or just a massage therapist or just an osteopath. You need to go to a chiropractor. If you go to a doctor initially who refuses to send you to a chiropractor, it's time to fire your doctor and get another. Even if your doctor says you're not a good candidate for chiropractic care, go to a chiropractor anyway and get a second opinion. They'll be honest with you if they can help you or not. I can't stress enough the importance of going to a chiropractor first, because you're really missing the boat if you don't. One of the last things I want to discuss is that you need to be a good patient. And what I mean by that is don't make your doctor have to dig information out of you. You want to be keeping records on your own, especially if you feel that there's some sort of brain damage. You want to keep a psychological log. Things like maybe you feel depressed more than usual, or that your headaches now seem a lot worse, or you can't sleep through a night anymore, or you're getting nightmares. Things that disrupt your daily life. Now also, if you took a lot of spinal injury, you also want to keep a record of how it's affecting you with daily tasks. Does it hurt to go to the bathroom now? Is it hard to shower? Can you actually hug your loved one without pain? These things your doctor needs to know, and you need to document them. One other thing is when you first go into a doctor, you want to make sure you list all your new complaints. Now, remember, the insurance company is only responsible for bringing you back to the level you were before the accident. They're not responsible for fixing everything that existed before the accident. So you want to make sure that you honestly tell them what's new. Now, that could also mean that your old injuries that have existed forever are now worse. So if now you have even worse neck pain than before, or your migraines are even worse, or now the numbness down your leg is even worse, you need to tell your doctor this when you first go in. Be sure to list any little minute detail, no matter how small, because you're not sure if that'll become a big detail later. So say you get a whiplash injury and your neck hurts really bad for 2 weeks, and that's all you really focus on. But you know what? You jammed your foot into the pedal really hard and your ankle's not right. Well, if you forget to mention your ankle when you go in, they're going to think that it had nothing to do with the car wreck. So even though, you come into the doc and, oh, my neck hurts really bad, just fix it, fix it, fix it. You also want to list every little injury that happened. Oh, well, my ankle's a little sore. My wrist is a little sore. I think I jammed some fingers. My teeth aren't right. Something came loose when I got hit. Whatever it happened, you need to document it. One of the questions I used to get a lot were people who got in a wreck and then just kind of didn't do anything about it, let a month or two go by, and now their neck really hurts or their shoulder really hurts. Is it too late to start a case if it's been a few months that it's been rolling? And the answer to that is no. But you're probably not going to get the same kind of settlement you would had you come in right at the beginning and it was well documented. Because what'll happen is, what happened during those 2 months that you didn't come in? Did you re-injure it some other way? There's all these different possibilities, and without documentation, it's kind of hard to prove that the accident was the cause of your pain 2 months later. Now, you can still go to someone, and they can probably help you, but don't expect it to be a slam dunk case like if you were to come in and do it right. That being said, please remember, don't lie and make stuff up just to get a better settlement. We doctors have special tests called malingering tests, which I can kind of figure out when you're lying and when you're not. And there's some other tests we can do to just flat out prove you're lying. And it always comes back and bites you when you try to settle this or it goes to court. Someone will find out you're lying, so just don't do it. One of the last things I want to say is, please remember, you can fire your attorney or fire your doctors anytime you want. If you're talking to your doctor and you really think some sort of test should be run and they just don't want to do it, or they're arguing with you, go to another doctor. Same with your attorney. If you're asking them, what's going on in my case, and you can't get them to call you back, or they're just ignoring you, fire them. Get a better attorney. You have to deal with these consequences and all the aftermath when the case is settled. So if you have permanent ligament damage, you're going to be dealing with this the rest of your life. It's never going to completely be the same, where once your case is done, attorneys don't have to deal with you ever again, and they just move on. Remember, this is kind of a big game that one attorney will go after the other and they'll fight like crazy in court, but when it's over, they both go out to dinner together and hang out. You have to live with the consequences. So you need to be proactive and be kind of a pain in the butt patient to make sure that everything's being done right for your case. If you thought this story was useful, please share this information. It's free, just put it out there. Favorite it so you can find it later. There's a lot of things I went over here, and you might need to watch this video a few times. Also, if you found this video really useful, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps other people find it. One last thing I want to say is you can swing over to my website, terranlupo.com. Just click here. There's a little tab appearing up there. You'll see it now. And you'll see lots of free stories about other topics. I do a lot of other health topics. I do some gardening topics. All that information's free, but I have videos up there that you can't find on YouTube very easily. They're unlisted. So just go there, sign up for my newsletter, and everything's free.